Hi, welcome to session 2. Today we're talking all about behavior, understanding your students' behavior for better planning and effective teaching. We'll discuss what is behavior and the types of behaviors we want to focus on, 4 key concepts in understanding behavior, the 4 major functions of behavior, what an ABC model is, and how to use it to better analyze and make better plans. The behavior we're discussing today must be behaviors that we can observe. They are actions that can either be counted or timed. Really, almost everything we do can be described as behavior. We want to make sure to avoid any thinking or feeling type behaviors because we cannot observe them in others. When we want to make behavior changes, whether to increase or decrease, we must be able to measure them and they must be observable so everyone is on the same page. We want to think about behavior in 4 key concepts. The first is that behaviors should be categorized in 2 ways, either adaptive or maladaptive. Number 2, behaviors are learned, both those adaptive and maladaptive. 3, behaviors are a form of communication. And 4, behavior serves a function or functions. So the first concept is categorizing behavior in 2 ways, either adaptive or maladaptive. Adaptive behaviors are the types of behaviors that help our students be more independent and successful. They enable a person to get along in their environment. Maladaptive behaviors are those behaviors that impede on the person's ability to get along in their environment or block access to learning and block access to independent living. Behaviors are learned. When we're thinking about behavior, we really want to look at what comes before the behavior occurs and what comes after. So we look at the environment. The environment sets up the likelihood that a behavior will happen. The response to a behavior will either increase or decrease the likelihood the behavior is going to happen again in the future. Let's take a look at this example of a learning process. The teacher places a demand on the student. The student then runs away. The teacher then removes the demand. The student escapes the demand, and therefore the running away behavior was reinforced. The student therefore learned, when a demand is placed that I don't want to do, I can just run away and it goes away. This increased the chances that this student's running away behavior will occur again in the future. The third concept is that behaviors are a form of communication. Your students are trying to say something. It's your job to figure out exactly what they're trying to communicate. When our students don't have effective communication, problem behavior or that maladaptive behavior is sometimes more effective. It's our job to figure out what they're trying to say and then find replacement behavior and teach them effective communication. The fourth concept is that behaviors serve a function. There are only 4 major functions of behavior. Remember, these functions are for both adaptive and maladaptive behavior. The first function is escape avoidance. A person does something to either get away or avoid an aversive stimuli. Aversive means something that they don't like or don't want. The second function is attention or attention seeking. A person engages in a behavior to gain attention from another person. The third is tangible. Tangible just means to obtain something that they can touch, feel, something tangible. They do something to get what they want or to gain access to something that they desire. Automatic function is an internal function, and it's a person engages in a behavior because it either feels good internally or it takes away a negative feeling. We use an ABC model to help us analyze behavior and understand maybe why it's occurring, look at some patterns and the conditions the behavior is occurring. Antecedent just means what occurs immediately before the target behavior. The behavior, again, is the target that you're being observed, that's observable and defined clearly. The consequence is what occurs right after the target behavior. We also call that the response. To look a little bit more closely, let's check out antecedents. Remember, it's a situation or an event that comes before a behavior. Sometimes we call it the trigger or the cue for the behavior to occur. It can be an event, a person, or an object in the environment. Some examples of antecedents include an alarm clock sound, which is the antecedent to get out of bed or push snooze. A stop sign is the antecedent to pressing brakes in a car. A screaming baby might be the antecedent to a mother making a bottle. Or dad saying clean up the toys could be the antecedent to a child starting to whine. Here's some practice in identifying antecedents. I gave the answer here, which is in bold, just for your reference. Susan hits Fred after he takes the book she is looking at. The behavior we're looking at is the hitting, right? Susan's hitting Fred. What happens right before? Fred takes the book. Mary starts to interrupt her father by screaming when he's talking on the phone. Mary is screaming, which is the behavior, and what happens right before screaming? She sees dad is talking on the phone. Randy throws his vegetables after his mother puts them on his plate. Mom puts the vegetables on Randy's plate is the antecedent to Randy throwing the vegetables. Noah screams when he sees the playground on the way to the doctor's office. Noah's screaming occurs after he sees the playground. Therefore, he sees the playground is the antecedent to Noah's screaming. When we talk about behavior, again, it must be observable, but we have to also define it really clearly. This is so crucial because we're communicating with so many others in reference to our students. We have to use very specific and detailed descriptions of what the observable behavior is so that everyone's clear about what exactly is happening. Oftentimes we hear non-descriptive terms being used, such as disruptive or aggressive. Those could be anything. We have to be very clear. Some examples for disruptive could be he calls out in class, out of turn. An example for aggressive could be he hits his peers with his fist. The consequence, again, is described as what comes after the behavior occurs. There's natural consequences and contrived consequences. A consequence that reinforces a behavior makes the behavior more likely to occur again and continue over time. A consequence that punishes the behavior makes the behavior less likely to occur again and continue over time. Consequences can either reinforce or punish a behavior. It's really crucial that you are able to identify what the function of your student's behavior is in order to determine what your consequence should be. If a consequence reinforces the behavior, it will increase the likelihood that the behavior is going to happen again in the future. It's really important that you identify an appropriate consequence in order to reach your end goal of either increasing or decreasing a behavior. Here's an example of how crucial it is that you identify the function of the student's behavior so that you can determine the appropriate consequence. Student is being disruptive in the classroom by making paper airplanes, talking loudly, and making goofy noises. The teacher sends him to the principal's office because he is being disruptive to the classroom. So let's take a look at these two functions, two scenarios. If the student's function of being disruptive was to escape from doing classwork, then the teacher sending him to the principal's office actually reinforced that disruptive behavior because now he doesn't have to do his classwork anymore. So in that moment, the teacher's removing him from the class was helpful to her, right, and to the other students in the classroom. But what ultimately happened is that she's reinforcing that disruptive behavior, and it's going to increase the likelihood that that student's going to keep being disruptive in class. So in the long term, it's really not an effective consequence. If the student's function was actually to gain attention from classmates, right, make them laugh and be silly, then the teacher's consequence of sending him to the principal's office actually punished the behavior because they removed him from the class and he no longer got that attention from his classmates. So the consequence therefore punished the behavior and decreased the likelihood that he's going to do that again. So this is just one example of how crucial it is that you identify the function of your student's behavior. And the way we do that is by using antecedent, behavior, and consequence, right? And we use ABC charts to help us analyze and see if there's any sort of patterns and identify possible functions. So let's take a look here. The first one is Ryan is given a turkey sandwich for lunch. Behavior is that Ryan then falls to the floor and screams that he wants the Pop-Tarts from his snack bag. The teacher, maybe she had a lot going on and she didn't want to deal with this tantrum. So she takes the sandwich away and just gives him the Pop-Tarts instead. So we look at this and we can sort of see the likely function of this behavior was to get what he wanted, right? He engaged in all that, tantrum-like behavior in order to get the Pop-Tarts. And the consequence was that he did get the Pop-Tarts. And so we can see here, and a teacher can look at this and say, oh, wow, maybe it stopped the tantrum, but really it reinforced the behavior. So chances are he's going to do the same thing again next time he gets something he doesn't want and he wants something else instead. Number 2, Ryan gets on the bus to school. Ryan starts to flap his hands and make guttural noises. The consequence is that the parrot continues to sit next to him and talks about the view out the window. And we can look at this, if there's no real connection between the antecedent and the consequence to the behavior, and that it's likely an automatically rewarding sort of behavior. It feels good internally. The third example is Ryan's teacher sits next to another student to provide support. Ryan, who's sitting across the room, cries and whines. The consequence is that the teacher gets up and soothes Ryan, pats his back, and gives some verbal attention. So while this one isolated event doesn't tell us much, could be a variety of things. Let's say that you have a pattern of the teacher giving attention to other students and this behavior occurring, and you could see that it's attention seeking, right? And the teacher does get up and gives Ryan attention, and therefore the consequence is reinforcing that behavior. So when analyzing that, you can notice a pattern. Oh, it's attention seeking. It's not that he needs or wants something, and therefore you can adjust your consequence in order to decrease that behavior and teach more effective adaptive behaviors or replacement behaviors. The fourth is Ryan's mother tells him to do homework. The behavior, Ryan runs away into his room. His mother lets him stay there because he's being quiet and she's getting some peace. So we can see here, the behavior of running away was really to escape or avoid that demand of doing homework, and it was actually reinforced. So it's really important to be able to analyze what your student's behavior is and what some potential triggers might be, but also whether or not the consequence is reinforcing or punishing the behavior so that we can make better plans. Here's a case example that we can sort of analyze. Michael is watching cartoons with his brother in the family room. His brother changes the channel. Michael hits his brother. His mother immediately scolds him and sends him to his room. So you can see the antecedent is that the brother changes the channel on the TV. Michael then hits his brother, but mom scolds him and sends him to his room. So the possible function to Michael's hitting is to gain access to what he wants, right? He wants to get the original channel back on the TV. So the function is tangible, to obtain something that he wants. But the consequence was that he had to go to his room. So the consequence punished the behavior. So mom is teaching Michael, you can't hit to get what you want. Another case example, Susie is playing a game on the computer when her father tells her that it's time to turn it off so she can start her homework. Susie then falls to the floor screaming and kicking. An attempt to stop Susie an attempt to stop Susie from waking her baby sister from her nap, Susie's father tells her that she can have a few more minutes on the computer. Okay, so we know that the antecedent is that the father says it's time to turn off the computer, right? So it's a transition, it's having to turn off something or a removal of something that's desired, right? So Susie's behavior is to fall on the floor, kicking and screaming. Okay, so we can see here that the likely function of behavior is again tangible, to be able to keep that computer. And the consequence is that the father says, okay, here's a few more minutes on the computer. So we can see that the consequence here, it reinforced, right? She got more computer time. She learned when I fall to the floor, scream and kick, I get what I want. So it's really important that we keep data. And most of you have heard of ABC data sheets. And it's really important that we utilize those ABC data sheets, not just because maybe we have to, but because we really need to analyze and do a functional assessment. So in keeping data for a few days and sometimes longer will help us determine that ABC relationship so that we can determine what the most likely function of the behavior is that we either want to see increase or decrease. So once we determine likely triggers or maybe something that's missing from the environment, we want to look at our ABC data and see how we can effectively and proactively change that antecedent and how we can plan a better consequence that gets us the results we want to see. So using an ABC data sheet also helps gather the information, document the information, provide dates, and possibly some other information that maybe we weren't seeing before, such as a specific time a behavior occurs, a specific setting, or a specific person that might be involved. When we're filling out our ABC data sheet, we have to always remember to avoid assumptions. We only want to state facts. Okay, only include the important information. We want to describe the behavior and describe what's being observed. And we want to take the data long enough to identify specific patterns and to be able to analyze our consequences. So here is a QR code that you can gain access to a Google Drive with various ABC data sheets that you can use in your classroom. They don't have to just be the state mandated ABC data sheets for students who don't have a BIP, right? We can use those ABC data sheets if you're comfortable with them, but there are many different types that you can use to gather the information so that you can be a better teacher. Email me directly at nbarnett@schools.nyc.gov. You can email me with any questions if you need help with analyzing your ABC data sheet or help filling out an ABC data sheet or identifying the function. Please feel free to reach out to me. Our next session 3, will be all about how to teach language and the importance of teaching requesting skills. And remember, behavior is a form of communication. So if they don't have functional communication, the likelihood problem behavior occurs is much greater. So please reach out to me and look forward to session 3. Thanks so much.